Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. Today is double upload day. I've already uploaded my team selection, and in today's video we have my deadline decisions, which is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. And I've also got a wildcard draft tomorrow morning and then a deadline stream on Friday evening. So in the space of 2 days we've got 4 pieces of content. Make sure to subscribe to see all of that, and like I said, make sure to tune into the deadline stream on Friday evening because it is a Friday deadline. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, we're going to start today with a discussion around Spurs mids and Arsenal mids. And I would argue this is the biggest discussion point this game week because a lot of us own both Maddison and Son, or at least one of them. And our only route to the likes of Saka, Martinelli and Udogie is to sell the Spurs midfielders. So is it worth selling a Spurs midfielder for an Arsenal midfielder? Unfortunately, it's not a straightforward decision, right? It's not just as simple as saying, yes, it is worth it, or no, it's not. It's very team dependent. It depends on the other things that are going on in your team. But I am less keen on this potentially than some other people, and I'll try to explain why that is the case. If we start with the fixtures are definitely better for Arsenal than they are for Spurs, right? In the next 3, Arsenal arguably have the 2 best fixtures in the league of Sheffield United at home and Burnley at home. And we know the likes of Saka and Martinelli are significantly better assets at home than away. Saka in particular, his data is almost double at home, at least last season, than what it was away from home. So I really like the next 3 fixtures, specifically because 2 of them are at home against easy sides. Of course, game week 11 is not ideal, but do you expect Arsenal to score? Potentially, although it is obviously away at Newcastle, which is one of the more difficult fixtures in the league. But they could still score, and realistically, not every fixture is going to be perfect. But when you take the next 3 together, they do look pretty good. And I would say that Arsenal assets, specifically Saka, could even be a captaincy option in 10, 12, and maybe even game week 13 when Man City play against Liverpool. So the fixtures are really there for Arsenal, and they're not overly there for Spurs. I don't mind Palace away this week, but Palace are much better defensively at Selhurst Park. Chelsea are one of the best defences in the league this season. That is not an easy fixture. Wolves away is actually pretty decent, but maybe not the kind of fixtures that would suit Son, because I don't expect Wolves to push all the way up the pitch and leave gaps in behind. Game week 13 is a very Son fixture, and maybe he could do well there. So I guess what I'm saying here is the fixtures aren't perfect for Spurs. That doesn't mean that I don't expect them to get goals and to get attacking returns, but definitely if you're looking at a fixtures play, the Arsenal fixtures are much better than the Spurs fixtures. I think every single week, if you compare the fixtures, Arsenal have a better fixture almost every single week than the Spurs. So definitely the fixtures play is to move your Spurs midfielder to an Arsenal midfielder. But why do I not think it's the best play then? It comes down to how good Maddison and Son are at the moment, right? If we're looking at data, and eye test-wise, they look fantastic, right? You don't need me to sit here and tell you that top of the league look really good and are scoring a lot of goals, but even data-wise, really, really good data. Son and Maddison are both sitting at a 0.7 XGI for the season. Actually, since Son has moved to the number 9, he is now at a 0.91 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. Even if you look at per appearance, because he's not getting 90 minutes, Son is still sat at a 0.78 non-penalty expected goal involvement per appearance. So they are both putting up outrageously good data, much better data than any of the other Arsenal midfielders that you could move to. So it feels crazy selling attackers from one of the better attacks in the league, putting up some of the best data in the league. And on top of that, we actually don't know who's on penalties for Spurs. It could be Maddison, it could be Son, or based on the recent quotes from Maddison, it sounds like it could be a combination of both. So that's their data without penalties. You chuck a few penalties in there because, listen, some teams have been very lucky so far. The likes of Brentford, the likes of Liverpool as well. Salah getting 2 penalties in the last 2. If you chuck a few penalties in there for Son and or Maddison, it becomes even more outrageous. So I just don't sit here and see that Maddison or Son are good sales at the moment. I know the fixtures aren't perfect, and you do have to play the fixtures in FPL, but selling assets that are not only delivering on their data, but are also consistently putting up the data to back them as assets, it just doesn't sit completely right with me. On top of that, and I know a lot of people don't like expected data, Son is one of the best, if not the best, finishers in world football. And he's shown that for about 3 seasons now. He will continuously overperform his expected data because he is prolific and clinical. And as a result, if he's putting up data that is close to that of the likes of Haaland and Darwin, but he is the best finisher in the Premier League and one of the best in world football, he's going to continue to overperform that as well. I also think Maddison is an exceptional finisher. So not only is Son going to finish the chances he gets, I think if he creates for Maddison, I expect more often than not Maddison to finish the chances as well. The only one that isn't is probably Richarlison, but those two I just think are so good. And I'm finding it very difficult to justify selling either of them. The issue we do have is that, like I said, Saka in and of himself is a fantastic asset, right? His data this season is better than it has been in previous seasons. So there is a real upgrade for Saka this season at 0.63 non-penalty expected goal involvement. His XG is much better at home, and 2 of the next 3 are some of the best home fixtures you can get. And like I said, he is a captaincy option in some of the upcoming game weeks. So it's not necessarily that we don't think Maddison and Son are good. Most people do. It's whether Saka is worth bringing in for either of them. Just quickly on Martinelli and Udogie. Martinelli is a great goal threat. His data this season hasn't been great, but generally speaking, since being in the Premier League, Martinelli will put up good data and get chances to score goals, and I think he will start more often than he doesn't. I do think he's a slight rotation risk with Trossard, but I think more often than not, Martinelli will start, he'll get chances, and I think he is a really nice asset. I don't think he's a better asset than Maddison and Son for me at the moment, at least, until I see a little bit more from him this season. And Ødegaard's data is just not there. Ødegaard is not an option for me because he's putting up 0.25 non-penalty expected goal involvement. He's not even creating chances at the moment. Yes, Sheffield United and Burnley are very Ødegaard fixtures, but I just don't see him as an option myself. So really, for me, it does come down to, if I am to sell one of the Spurs midfielders, it would only be Saka that I was interested in. However, I wouldn't sell Son. I don't even think there is a question in my mind about whether Son to Saka is worth it. Because for me, Son is one of the best assets to own in FPL at the moment. Arguably, if we're looking at price, maybe the best asset to own in FPL. Because I think Salah's a slightly better one. You could argue Haaland is as well. But they are more expensive than Son is. Son is putting up better data than Salah when we're looking at expected goals, non-penalty. He's putting up similar, if not slightly worse data than Haaland. But as I said, he is such a brilliant finisher that he'll probably slightly overperform that. And he hasn't even had any penalties recently to go alongside that data. So for me, Son is just a season keeper at the moment, unless we see a bit of a drop-off from him or unless he gets injured. So Son would not be sold for me. I do not think Son to Saka is worth it, in my opinion. But of course, if you want to bring Saka in and you're thinking about captaining him and stuff like that, then by all means make that move. But for me, I can't justify selling Son. A move that I don't necessarily mind, as long as it's for free, is Maddison to Saka. Because I think this is fairly close. I think Saka is a slightly better FPL option. And I think because the fixtures are also better for Arsenal, when you look at someone's a slightly better option, the fixtures are also slightly better. I do think Maddison to Saka is a slight upgrade, but I don't think it's an obvious one. So even if you can do that for free, I still don't think Maddison to Saka is like, yeah, it's a really obvious move to make. But I do think it's worth it. So Maddison to Saka I'm fine with for free. If it's for a hit, I'd probably just keep Maddison. Maddison's actually brilliant away from home as well. And this is an away fixture. So for free, don't mind it. Wouldn't do it for a hit. Then the final thing to discuss is you probably don't necessarily need to do it in Game Week 10, right? Yes, it's a great fixture this week, but you could potentially delay it until Game Week 12 because, yes, again, the fixture is better this week for Arsenal than for Spurs, but in Game Week 11, Arsenal have Newcastle away and Spurs have Chelsea at home. Neither of those are great fixtures, but I would probably slightly prefer to have Maddison and Son than I would an Arsenal asset. So could you maybe delay the move until Game Week 12 and prioritise some other transfers this week, which allow you to do it for free in Game Week 12, potentially? So I'll leave it there. I don't think it's a straightforward yes or no. I know I've given the cases for maybe keeping them, but I also don't mind selling them. The fixtures play is definitely to move a Spurs midfielder to an Arsenal one, but for me, I wouldn't be selling Son in a million years because I think he's such a great asset to hold. Maddison, I don't mind, but of course, you've got to find the funds to do it. So guys, in this next section, we are sort of ranking the big hitters. And I know these aren't all of the big hitters as such because there is no Bruno Fernandes here. There's no Maddison. There's no Alvarez in this section either. But these are 7 players that I think a lot of people, if they're on their wildcard or maybe you've got free transfers, ideally you would probably have all 7 of these options. I don't think there are any people that would sit there and say that some of these 7 options aren't great. So you'd ideally have all 7. But if you are on your wildcard, you're still going to have to sacrifice probably 1, if not 2 of these, maybe even 3 potentially. And if you're not on your wildcard, it may be that you have to prioritize certain players in a specific order. So I thought we would just have a bit of a chat around these 7 players, in which order I would prioritize bringing them in which order I think they are the most important assets to own, and some of the nuances around it, because some of them are better to own short term, but less so long term, if that makes sense. So all of that to say, I still think Salah is the best player to own in FPL at the moment. I did just say in the previous section that if we're looking at budget, Son may well be slightly better for me. But I just think with the fixtures coming up, with the reliability and consistency that we've seen from Salah now for multiple years, on penalties, 90 minutes, a very good finisher in and of himself, creating so much as well this season. There's just very little to dislike about Salah. Like, Salah has to be in the team for me. So I would say your number one priority this week, both in the short and long term, at least until he goes to AFCON probably, or maybe around game week 17, it just has to be Salah. So Salah is non-negotiable for me. I think he's the best asset to own in FPL at the moment. But like I said, and people disagree with this, Son for me is the second best. That what is it that you don't like about Son, right? Apart from the fixtures are turning slightly, he's the number 9 for one of the best attacks in the league, getting tons of chances and one of the best finishers in world football. So for me, Son is not essential as such, but he is one of the priorities to own at the moment, even above some of the other players with better fixtures. So Son and Salah would, for me, be non-negotiable on a wild card. And if you don't own either of those, I still like the idea of bringing them in. And I've actually put in third, above Saka, Watkins. Yes, Watkins is overperforming his data by a ridiculous margin, and no, he won't continue to deliver double-digit hauls if his data doesn't improve slightly, but he still was only blanked, I think, once this season. He's got 2 double-digit hauls in the space of 3 game weeks as well, one of those being a 23-pointer, and the next 3 fixtures for Aston Villa are ridiculous. Like, what is there to dislike about Watkins? The only thing, I suppose, is he's not on penalties. So that is one thing that other players in and around him have that he doesn't have, but he doesn't seem to need them. Great finisher at the moment anyway, in form, playing under a brilliant side with great home fixtures coming up, and they're one of the best home teams in Europe's top 5 leagues. I don't need to keep talking about Ollie Watkins. For me, again, not essential. Yes, he is quite expensive, but I would prioritise him above all of the other players lower on this list. So for me, if there are only 3 players that you kind of have to own in FPL at the moment, or you would try and bring in, it's Salah, Son, Watkins. I've then got Saka just below Watkins, just due to the fact that they have Newcastle in 12, and also the fact that Saka is sort of handing out penalties left, right and centre at the moment. If Saka was comfortably the only one on pens, it would make me a little bit more tempted to put him above Watkins. I think if this was game week 12, Watkins would drop down and Saka would go up, right? But at the moment, with the next few that Watkins has, I think he should be more of a priority than Saka. That being said, if you are looking at a longer term transfer, i.e. you need to hold this player longer term, and maybe you have to choose between Watkins and Saka, if you can only own one, I would actually own Saka. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I guess I'm saying if you're going to own both and you have to prioritise one, you prioritise Watkins. If you can only own one for the long term, I still feel like Saka's the slightly better asset. So you need to think about what are your future moves. Are you going to be able to own them both? Will you be able to bring in Saka around game week 12 or 13? And if you can, I would prioritise Watkins this week. I know this is going to sound like I've got an anti-Haaland agenda, but I have him in 5th. He is, if you had unlimited budget, comfortably the best asset in FPL, right? He is. His data's there. He's got the most shots in the league or shots in the box. He's got the best non-penalty expected goal involvement in the league as well, the best non-penalty expected goals. He's playing in the best attack in the league. Haaland is perfection. He's a brilliant FPL asset, but he's 14 million. And the amount that you can do with that budget means that for me, he is not in the top 4 most essential players to own in FPL at the moment. But if you can get him in alongside those top 4, I would. And in tomorrow's video, I'm going to have a wildcard draft for you. And I have Haaland, Saka, Watkins, Son and Salah. So if I was on a wildcard at the moment, I would have Haaland in there, but he wouldn't be a priority for me. And I think there is definitely justification, just due to his price at the moment, to sell him. But I would only sell Haaland if your team value isn't very good. The only way I would sell him is if you really can't get to a lot of the other players that you want because you've got low team value. If your team value is pretty good, I don't think you really need to sell Haaland at the moment. There are so many ways to get to other players in your team, whether that be for a -4 or sometimes a -8, where you can maintain Haaland in your team and still get to a lot of these other big hitters. So I like Haaland. I love him a lot. He's a great asset, but just due to his price, currently he's 5th for me. And then Trippier and Bowen, again, I love both of these. I have both Trippier and Bowen in my team, but I don't think they're as essential as the other 5, right? Trippier at 7 million, you need the clean sheets to continue, and you need the attacking returns to continue. And whilst I think both of those will happen, Trippier will still get assists, and Newcastle are one of the best defences in the league. The previous 4 or 5 fixtures where Trippier's done really well, they have been so good. They've played the likes of Sheffield United, Brentford, Burnley. They've been really good fixtures. And whilst game week 10 isn't a bad fixture, beyond that, Newcastle's fixtures aren't perfect. So am I expecting clean sheets to still happen? Yes, but they will dry up. And am I expecting assists to continue? Yes, but not at the rate of like 5 in 3 weeks or 5 in 4 weeks or 6 in 4 weeks. Like, it's not going to continue at that rate for Trippier because it would be a ridiculous 310 point season if he keeps that up. So I expect a bit of regression and a bit of a dip from Trippier. And as a result, I think 7 million for a defender is just very, very difficult to justify, especially when you look at combinations, right? Would I prefer like Bowen and a cheap defender or Trippier and a cheap midfielder? Maybe Bowen, right? So I don't think that Bowen is a better asset than Trippier, hence Trippier being 6th and Bowen 7th. But when I look at combinations, i.e. something like a Gahey and a Bowen versus a Trippier and a dead midfield spot, I think I prefer the idea of having that Bowen price point in the midfield and having a decent cheap defender. So for that reason, Trippier, if I was on a wild card this week, I probably would drop Trippier out of the team. And Bowen is great, as is Alvarez, as is Maddison and Matoma, all of these players. But if you're trying to squeeze the other 5 or 6 big hitters in there, Bowen just wouldn't be a priority for me when you look at Salah, Son, Watkins, Saka, Haaland, Trippier. I think they're all probably slightly ahead of him. But again, I love Bowen, great expected goals at the moment, and I expect him to do very well. But you do have to sacrifice. And you may disagree with this list, but that's the whole point. At the moment, you have to pick the players that you want to own, and you have to pick the players that you are most happy not owning, and you have to hope that ends up well for you. And at the moment, I've chosen from this list Haaland, right? I'm going to own 6 of these 7 players, and Haaland will be the only one that I don't. But for other people, you may have to pick 2 or 3. So let me know down below how you would rank these big hitters, but I think all 7 and the likes of Alvarez, Maddison, etc. are all great, but you can't own everyone. So now that we've discussed those major 2 topics around Arsenal and Spurs mids and the big hitters and who we can sacrifice, we're going to fly through some other stuff in this video, starting with Brighton assets. Obviously, the fixtures coming up are ridiculous. Fulham, Everton, Sheffield United and Forest in the next 4 are great. And then also from game week 16, 17 onwards, there's another nice fixture run. So it's only really that Chelsea game in the middle for me at the moment that I'm not that keen on, but Chelsea do still concede some chances, and Brighton are a fantastic attack. So do I think Brighton assets are worth considering? Absolutely, and I would have at least 1 on my wildcard. Of course, that probably would be Matoma, who we'll discuss in a second. But there are some other assets that we can consider. So just to give you the latest news around injuries, Estepinian is back on grass. I should note that I'm recording this before the Thursday Europe games, so I haven't seen the Brighton, Aston Villa, Liverpool teams and results. But I should note that Estepinian could be back very soon. So he is a player that I would definitely consider once we know he's back, but it's probably too big of a risk to bring him in before that. However, March and Welbeck are both injured, and they look like they could be pretty long-term injuries for the 2 of them, which removes 2 players from the attack. And yes, they still have options to rotate. That doesn't mean that all of the other attackers are now nailed, but it does make them slightly more nailed. And the 3 players that I am most interested in are the 3 on your screen, which is Adingra, Matoma, and João Pedro. Because I think if I was to predict Brighton's favoured front 4 at the moment, it's Adingra, Matoma, João Pedro, and then probably Ferguson. Ferguson hasn't been playing very well at the moment. His data has been pretty poor. I've seen Brighton fans really complaining and saying that he's struggled so far this season. So Ferguson's probably now first choice with Welbeck out. But I do think we could see João Pedro through the middle and Ansu Fati playing with either Adingra or Fati as the number 10. Probably Ansu Fati. So I don't think Ferguson would be of interest for me. So it'd be Adingra, Mitoma, or João Pedro. João Pedro is on penalties when he's on the pitch, and his data's pretty good, and he's also very, very cheap. So I actually think João Pedro is one of my favourite forwards to own at the moment, especially if you need one at a cheaper price. But obviously, he comes with the risk that we just don't know if he'll start every single game. But you would imagine with Welbeck out, and also with Solly March out, that creates 2 more spots in the attack, and there'll be slightly less rotation as a result. So I do like João Pedro. Adingra is arguably the one that I'd be most excited by outside of Matoma, though. He tends to play on the right-hand side, which is Solly March's favoured position. And yes, they do have Ansu Fati that can play on the right. But as I said, Ansu Fati has also been trialled, I think it was in the Europe game, through the centre as the number 10. So I think Adingra's minutes, he started the last 2 games, I believe. I think his minutes will be pretty good coming up. And for 5 million, you can't really go wrong with him. I don't know if I would be willing to bet that it will start every game. So if you've got a weak bench, maybe not the one moving forward, because then you might have to move him out after that. But he may be worth the risk. I've seen a lot of Brighton fans very, very keen on him, and I do really like him as an asset. So Adingra at 5 would probably be my second favourite asset to own from Brighton at the moment. And then just to finish with Matoma, Matoma's minutes are going massively under the radar. I actually looked at them before this video. Ridiculous. He's played 90 minutes in pretty much every single game, apart from one where he started on the bench, came on and scored a brace at half-time. And then I think there was one more fixture where he came off in the 80th minute. But Matoma has played pretty much every minute available for Brighton this season. Again, injuries popping up all over the place for Brighton. I expect him to continue to start every single game. I don't actually think their schedule looks too bad either. And I've seen some people suggesting that Mitoma isn't with the Japan squad for the upcoming international break. So there's very little to dislike about Mitoma. I feel like he's fit. I feel like he's had enough rest. I don't actually mind the schedule for Brighton. And I think he is so critical to that attack. I would be surprised to see Mitoma benched in an upcoming Premier League game. And if he is, it's probably only one, and he can still do damage off the bench. So Mitoma is up there in the top 2, 3, 4 transfers that I would prioritise. Alongside the likes of Watkins, Son, Salah and Saka, Mitoma would be up there for me. And on a wild card, I would definitely have Mitoma. Of course, if you can't afford Mitoma, I do still think Adingra is a really nice option. So to put that all together, Estepinian when he's back, I really like the look of. Wouldn't consider any of the other defenders. João Pedro I like because he's on penalties, but his minutes aren't perfect. Adingra I expect to get good minutes, and I like him at the cheaper price. But Mitoma would, of course, be the one I'd go for. And if you're asking me if you think you should bring him in for this week, I love it. So Game Week 10 captaincy debate, and I was hesitant to even bother discussing this because it's just so difficult to try and predict. Like all 4 of the players on your screen, plus even like a Heung-min Son could be decent. They're all absolutely fine options, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Salah, Haaland, Saka or Watkins are bad options. They've all got good data. 3 of them have penalties. Saka kind of half does. 2.5 of them have penalties. And they're all in decent enough form getting attacking returns, right? Haaland's just scored 2 in the Champions League. His data still continues to be good. Salah is obviously in insane form, getting penalties all over the place, but also attacking returns too. Liverpool is such a great attack. Saka has arguably the best fixture in the league on paper. If he's on penalties for that game, great as well. And Watkins is probably the most informed player in the Premier League. So I love all of them. And again, he's playing Luton at home. So I don't dislike any of them. I personally think that Ollie Watkins is fine as an option, right? He's, like I said, the most informed player in the Premier League, getting returns left, right and centre against Luton at home. And Aston Villa are one of the best teams in Europe's top 5 league at home. They are so good at home. And Luton are not very good away. Everything is pointing towards Villa absolutely battering Luton. My only concern is that Watkins' data still isn't quite there, right? It is still good, but it does suggest that sooner rather than later, there'll be a bit of a drop-off from him. He'll still continue to return, but not at the rate that he currently is. And I always feel like forwards have to do a hell of a lot more than midfielders to get a lot of points, right? Midfielders get extra points for goals, extra points for clean sheets as well. And in a multiple return game, midfielders just always tend to score and get more. So as an example, Heung-min Son got a 14-pointer and Ollie Watkins got an 11-pointer for exactly the same thing in Game Week 9, right? So that's an extra 3 points. That's an extra 6 points with captaincy. So I always tend to prefer midfielders. And also, Ollie Watkins is the only one definitely not on penalties. So to put that all together, yeah, for me, Watkins is absolutely fine. I like him as a captaincy option, but for me, he would be 4th on this list. I would then say that maybe Bukayo Saka would be 3rd on this list. I know he's got the best fixture on paper, and Bukayo Saka is brilliant at home. But what Saka has that the other 3 doesn't have is slight fitness doubts. Now, I think he's fine, but he played 81 minutes in Europe, but he did go down injured once again. And I've seen a few rumours floating around that if there is a game to bench him, or not rumours, but predictions, that if there is a game to bench Saka, maybe this is the one. But listen, Saka plays every minute that he's available. Even when he's injured, he still plays. So I don't buy that. I think he'll start. But if there are some doubts around him, is it worth the risk? And on top of that, like I said, he is kind of passing penalties around at the moment. So he may not even be on the penalties that we expect him to be on. So I love Saka. I'll be bringing in Saka this week almost definitely. I mean, by the time you watch this, I may have already done it. Great fixture. I have no issues with him. But I wonder if the other 2 assets, Haaland and Salah, are slightly better. I mean, Haaland may well be the best captaincy option this week. Man United are a mid-table defence at best. Yes, Harry Maguire hasn't been playing terrible recently, but Haaland will bully our defence. I mean, this is a fixture where I could see Haaland getting 2 or 3 attacking returns. Obviously, he got 2 returns in the Champions League as well. My only slight concern is Haaland isn't great away from home, and Man City just haven't been performing to the highest level recently. Yes, they beat Young Boys, but they made a bit of a meal of it. And they've done that quite a lot recently, where they're not putting teams to the sword, and they're not really necessarily putting in performances where they're getting sort of 3 or 4 XG and above. So will Haaland haul in this? Most probably. But is he the best captaincy option? I'm just not so sure. So maybe I would put Haaland in 2nd, which means that I'd probably have Salah as the best captaincy option. But again, I'm not overly sure on this one because Nottingham Forest are not a bad defence. If this was Forest away for Salah, I wouldn't captain him in a million years because Forest are better when they're at home. and they're not as great away from home, but they're certainly not a terrible defence. They're pretty good going forward as well, and I would expect them to give Liverpool a bit of a game here. So I don't think this is, I would actually argue, out of the 4 options, this may be the worst fixture on paper, because I really don't mind the Forest defence. But what Salah has is absolute safety in minutes, absolute safety in being on penalties, and he is an informed player that even when you remove the penalties, he's still putting up good non-penalty expected goal involvement. So he feels like a very reliable, safe option, whereas the other 3 all have slight issues associated with them, or maybe slight negatives. So I think at the moment I'm planning on just defaulting to Salah, more so because there are slight things that are putting me off any of the other options in my team. If I had Haaland, I would be tempted in all honesty, but of course I don't own him. So that's all I'm going to say on captaincy. All 4 of these, plus even a Heung-min Son, could be fantastic options for Game Week 10. I think you just go with your gut feeling and hope that luck and variance is on your side. So unfortunately, most of the press conferences are actually on Friday this week, but we'll discuss all of the news that we get on the Friday deadline stream. So do make sure to tune into that 2 hours before the deadline, 4:30 p.m. UK time, and we'll go over everything from the press conferences in that stream. But we did get some Newcastle updates this week, and unfortunately their injury issues do continue. Both Isak and Murphy have picked up injuries. Murphy's dislocated his shoulder, which could be quite a long-term injury, and Isak is thought to be out for around 5 matches, taking us up to the next international break. On top of that, Elliot Anderson has picked up a back injury, which will mean he will be missing for a few weeks, and Botman still isn't back. We don't actually have a specific time frame on Botman, but it looks like it could be at least a couple more weeks. And that's at sort of an optimistic level. Like, it could even be longer than that for Botman, because we keep getting these updates that Botman's almost there, and yet he's still not even in full team training. So for me, Botman is probably a sell unless you can get away with just repeatedly benching him, but I just don't necessarily see the value in that. So no specific update on Botman at the time of me recording, but probably not an asset that you necessarily want to keep holding on to. If you have Alexander Isak, you sell him. If for some reason you have Jacob Murphy, you sell him. But what I really wanted to discuss is the options that this gives us as a result. Firstly, Gordon will still be, but maybe even slightly more now, a fantastic asset. He is that real consistent player in the Newcastle attack that will start every single game, and I think he is absolutely critical to the way that Eddie Howe wants to play at the moment. So Gordon at that price feels like ridiculous value, and for me, I think he will continue to start almost every single game available for Newcastle and get close to 90 minutes in those games as well. So Anthony Gordon is an excellent option. Love him as a player. I think this only makes him an even slightly better asset. If you're looking for a cheap player, I probably would go for him. But the one that I'm really excited about is Callum Wilson, right? We know when one of Isak or Wilson is out confirmed, more often than not, i.e. pretty much every single game, that means that the other one will start through the middle. Now, I do think there is the chance to potentially do something like Gordon through the middle and then play some other players out wide, but they're also missing a lot of their players that they can play on the wings too. So I feel like Gordon on the left is pretty much secure. I think Almiron will start most games on the right at the moment, and that just leaves the forward spot to Wilson. The issue is that Wilson having to play every game for Newcastle is going to be difficult for him as well to avoid injury. So we may see quite a lot of early substitutions for Wilson, but I do think this obviously makes him relatively nailed. So I really don't mind a punt on Wilson if you're on wildcard or you need a striker at that price point. But yeah, Anthony Gordon is still the best Newcastle asset to own when you take into account pricing. So some interesting updates around Newcastle there. Hopefully from an FPL perspective, this doesn't really impact their defence. I don't think it will, because I think Lascelles, Burn, Trippier, Fabian Schär, I think they've been really solid defensively. It might just mean that they're not as good going forward whilst they adapt to all of the injuries that they've got. So just to finish up, we did get the press conference from Postecoglou today, and he did give us an update on Udogie because he was subbed off around 55 minutes in Game Week 9, which meant he didn't get the clean sheet. But we did get an update that it was maybe due to muscle tightness. The update that we got from Postecoglou today is, he said, Destiny, we're going to look at and assess. It's a short turnaround, so we'll see how he does today and make a decision tomorrow. So for what it's worth, I think Destiny Udogie may start in Game Week 10, but at the very least, this doesn't look overly serious at the moment, at least. And I think Postecoglou is a genuinely honest manager. The vibe that I get from him isn't like Arteta or Pep, where I think he'll play mind games. We've seen in the past, when a player's fit, he'll just come out and say that player's fit. And if they're not, he'll say that. So I genuinely think Destiny Udogie probably is touch and go. I was going to sell him anyway, because the only way for me to get Saka into my team was to downgrade Udogie to a £4.5 million defender. So I think if you were looking to sell him anyway, this makes it a lot more straightforward that you don't have that concern that he's going to necessarily haul. Although, like I said, he could start. A lot of the questions, therefore, is would you sell him? And if so, who for? I don't think you necessarily need to rush him out unless you've got absolutely no bench cover, or we get a rumour that he is definitely confirmed out. But if you do want to sell him, I think you've got tons of really good options. If you're looking to downgrade him, I think there are 3, maybe 4 standout options. The first is Tsimikas. Do I think Tsimikas is 100% nailed? No. Do I think he's going to cover the likes of Trent? No. But he is a 4.5 at the time of me recording £1 million asset from Liverpool, who are a mid-table-ish defence at the moment, with great fixtures coming up and some pretty decent attacking threat. So I still do really like Tsimikas, but I don't think he's a game breaker. I don't think he's the obvious and only replacement for Udogie. But he is currently the player that I am most likely to bring in. Outside of that, I still feel like a West Ham defender, despite their defensive data, could be a decent shout. Someone like an Agurd or a Zuma at 4.5 could be really decent options. I still think Gahey at 4.5 could be really good. Palace have some really nice fixtures in the short term. So if you need a player from game week 11 to sort of game week 14, Gahey's a great option. But of course, he doesn't have an ideal fixture in game week 10. So if you need a player in game week 10, maybe Gahey's not the one. And in a similar way to Gahey, I actually like Harry Maguire at 4.2 million. Man United's fixtures from 11 to 14 are pretty good. So it really does depend when you need this asset. I would look ahead to future game weeks and sort of planning around that. If you don't need to downgrade Udogie and you can go to someone at the same price or more, I do still like the Arsenal defenders. I think I would go for Gabriel because he's the cheapest. Zinchenko's a bit of a rotation risk. Saliba is quite a bit more expensive, as is Ben White. So for me, I would go for Gabriel. Yes, there's a small chance he's dropped in the future, but I think at the moment that looks quite unlikely. He's been very, very good this season since he came back into the side. A lot of people, therefore, probably deciding between Tsimikas and Gabriel. Obviously, if you have to downgrade, it's a nice, easy choice. I think Tsimikas is better in the short term, and obviously he has a much better fixture in game week 11 against Luton, whereas Gabriel plays against Newcastle. So if you're looking in the short term and you need a player for 11, I think I prefer Tsimikas. He's got the slightly greater attacking threat too, but Gabriel's playing in a better defence, and I think he's a better long-term hold. So if you've been burnt by making too many sort of rotation risk decisions and having to make too many transfers in your defence because you keep getting flagged players and players losing their places, maybe you just go for Gabriel. Gabriel, if he stays in the side, is a season keeper, whereas Tsimikas almost definitely isn't. And there is the chance that Tsimikas drops out and becomes an issue in the near future. So depends what kind of manager you are, depends what you're looking for from this asset, depends on the pricing as well, and also depends on how long you are looking to own this player and if you're willing to make a defensive transfer in the future. If I had unlimited funds in this spot, I would probably actually move for Gabriel, but I do have to make a downgrade to afford the move I want to. So for me, I'm planning Udogie to Tsimikas at the moment. I'm going to attack the upside probably and just hope that he keeps his spot at least for the next sort of 4 to 5 game weeks. And then if I have to move him out after that, I will deal with that when it happens. But I do also have some decent bench cover in the likes of Gahey. So let me know down below if you're removing Udogie, who are you most likely to bring in? So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 10 deadline decisions video. As I said, I already uploaded my team selection video earlier today, and I have a wildcard draft and deadline stream tomorrow. So do make sure to check out all of that content, as well as the 2 videos that we've already released this week as well. And if you do appreciate all of the content, please do smash a like on today's video and make sure to subscribe as well. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.